Home Depot started this agile journey I would say probably about a year ago, 2 years ago, depending on who you asked. A lot of it started out as a grassroots effort from a lot of our teams internally. We had some leadership changes, and our senior VP has been very vocal and adamant about kind of speeding up the transformation. So he's helped out, he reached out to Pivotal, and we've gotten a lot of great help from them. So the talk tonight really is about people, process, and tools. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but typically we all like to point fingers and say, no, it's their fault, the tool sucks, the people, or whatever, right? So I think what Cloud Foundry has enabled us to do is it takes out one of those pieces of the equation. So for us, we can no longer blame our tool set for a lot of the inadequacies in our company, right? It's allowed us to be very candid and honest and introspective about the conversations that were happening. We have a lot of people involved to make software happen at Home Depot, and sometimes we don't collaborate as much as we should. And so I think this tool has really helped spark some interesting conversations. And we've done a lot of things wrong in the beginning, so I hope that by airing out some of our dirty laundry, we can help some other teams get it right. So tonight we're going to talk about a few different topics. We'll tell you a little bit about myself. We'll talk about what our mission was in the beginning, the plan of attack that we had for going after this transformation, and then the reality of that, because plans never go as we originally planned, right? They always happen, something different happens. And I think really the benefit of this talk will be all the challenges and then the lessons that we've learned from doing that. So as Nick talked about, I come from a background in UX and agile and organizational change. So when my leadership approached me and they said, hey, we want you to manage our platform team in Cloud Foundry, I said, you must be crazy. I'm not an architect, I'm not super technical, I don't know all of these things, right? Our team has built a custom grid that we use as Tomcat-based Java. They've worked on it for a long time, and it's really awesome. But we're looking to the future and to get better, and so Cloud Foundry was a good choice for us. So we have a lot of passionate people who have a lot of emotional ties to those things, and so making that transition is more of a cultural thing for us. And so I think it turned out to be a good fit for me to lead this team. If you want to reach out to me, LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not a super active social media guy. I don't blog and all that stuff. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. So the mission was very simple, right? Some people are like saying, hey, we were going to do Scrum, we're going to do XP, we're going to do TDD, we're going to do something, right? Our leadership kept it very simple and broad. The message was we just need to get better at building software. For us, the strategy is to become a great software company, right? We feel strongly that all companies, no matter their domain or their space, sooner or later, you need to get really good at building software. And for us, we do a lot of applications and development, so for us, getting better at that was one of our key drivers. So we had this awesome plan that we came up with. We brought up Google, and we're like, all right, how do I build better software? So again, like I said in the beginning, we had all of these teams that were trying to figure this out, and Agile was a big buzzword for that. So of course, this leads to a lot of research and reading. So we learned about DevOps, and microservices, and Scrum, and 12-factor app, and XP, cloud native, and what that meant, and it goes on and on and on. So we're all reading, we're all talking, we're all debating, and it's all in paper, and we're all difference of opinions, and it sounds really, really great, and it sounds really, really awesome. We're like, yeah, let's just do this and this, and sooner or later, we had enough talk, and we had to start doing. And that's where it got really interesting. And this is pretty much what it turned into. Lots of new topics for us, lots of new principles and methodologies and ways of thinking. So we did what anyone do. We would say, all right, let's get some help doing this, right? So I reached out to a couple of companies in the beginning. And again, this wasn't an organizational change yet. This was a lot of independent teams trying to latch onto an idea. Worked a little bit with ThoughtWorks, Slalom Consulting, it's a local company there. And then eventually we reached out to Pivotal and ECS and the team to really help guide us through this transformation. So we've done a lot of work with our labs teams, getting on Cloud Foundry, and we're trying to bring that, a lot of the teachings and learnings from that. And we're still in the infancy, but I think we've learned a lot of things about the culture. So we also went out and got some tools. IT KL Lisa, has anyone heard of this? CA Lisa? No one? And definitely check that out. We got Jira, GitHub. How many people are using GitHub? Oh, awesome. Wow. I'm surprised it took us that long. So, Slack. How many people have some sort of collaborative chat thing? What are some of the big ones besides Slack? Anyone's using HipChat? I've heard of FlowDoc. I've heard a couple others. Okay. And then the big one was Pivotal Cloud Foundry. It's also the most expensive one, but yeah. So we brought all these new tools in, right? And this is kind of what work looked like for us for a while. We're all sitting there. We're playing with new toys. We're all super excited. It's all rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, and everyone's having a lot of fun. And then the first team decided, they're like, you know what? We're going to make this real. We're going to take our first application and put it in production on Cloud Foundry. So we turned this into this very quickly. So instead of this really cool, exciting collaborative work environment to push to production, we turned it into like a NASA command center. We had like tons of people there and all these departments and silos. And so we learned a lot. And really what that did is it sparked a lot of very interesting conversations for us. So tonight I'm going to share some of those with you, ask you some questions, get you guys to think about some things internally. It's going to hopefully be sort of interactive, but we're going to talk about some of the things that we learned. So CF push. So how many people now currently are using Cloud Foundry or some other platform as a service currently? Okay. How many people are thinking about moving to some sort of platform as a service in the near future? Okay, cool. So CF push, this was awesome. I mean, we're like, dude, I can deploy to my environment in minutes, right? And for us, this used to be like an all-night thing on the weekend. And it still is in some cases for our other platform. But the first time this team came back from New York and labs, and they're used to pushing in minutes, the first time they went into production, it took 4.5 hours. So what do we think could be some reasons why something that should take a few minutes ended up being several hours? Do we have any thoughts on that?
You violated 12 factor.
Yeah, what's up? Yeah.
Release management.
Release, that's a good one, yes.
Overnight downtime.
Overnight downtime, yeah, we didn't have that, but yeah. Manual deployment? Yeah, no, we were trying to do CF push. That was all we were trying to do. Someone just had to type it in and hit enter. That's all they had to do. Yeah.
Database migrations.
Database migrations.
Bad monitoring.
What's that?
Bad monitoring.
Bad monitoring. I wish it were all those things.
The guy showed up late.
Yeah, someone showed up late. No, we were there early. Some people did show up late, and it was these people. So change management, support, like where are the run books? What about SOX compliance? Do we have separation of duties? Who's pushing the code, or do they have access to the source code, right? So there's all these questions that came up that a lot of teams don't think about when they're kind of just going out and doing a CF push. Honestly, I don't know if we invited all of these people, and that may have been by design, but they showed up anyway. But it's awesome, because it's kind of what started the journey for us. So the manager of this team got really frustrated, and rightfully so. And she sent me an email, and she's like, dude, why did this take 4.5 hours? She showed me these great screenshots of what the teams were doing in New York and labs and the pair programming and all this stuff. And then she took screenshots of our war room when we were trying to do a deployment for the first time. And it was really eye-opening to me. And I said, yeah, you're right. Like, we can't do this. That's not sustainable. So we learned lots of lessons for this. So one of the first lessons that we learned is we have to get all the players involved early on. I think the labs teams do a really great job at getting teams, like pushing them out there and getting really super agile and iterative. But what we ran into is when the teams came back, we didn't have all the people there that we needed to begin with. So we had all these security folks and networking folks and operations folks. It's like, how do we get them involved earlier? And that was on us. Someone asked, like, hey, do we have all the people here that we need? And we're like, yeah, you have the developers and the QA and the product owner, like, you're good to go. And it turns out we didn't have all the right people there. The other thing that we learned, and this is really the crux of this whole presentation, is that Since the platform was new, we kind of used that as an opportunity or a catalyst to really question everything we were doing. Nothing was sacred. So every time we would say, hey, why do we have to do this? Someone's like, that's the way we've always done it. And we're like, no, we don't do it that way anymore, right? So we have lots of different ways of doing it. So we had a lot of really tough conversations about that. The 5 whys, how many people are familiar with the 5 whys? Awesome, I don't have to explain that. My company isn't that familiar with the 5 whys. So I got really annoying to lots of people. And it's like, hey, why do we do this? Great. Why did you do that? Great. Why did you care about that, right? And sooner or later, you boil down to some root cause analysis stuff. And we started tackling those issues instead of all the other issues, right? And really for us, what it boiled down to is, they had this whole separation of duties and SOX compliance. And their main concern was that they wanted to not have someone have the power to put code into production if that same person had the ability to change code. And so once we explained the whole labs process and the pair programming and the code reviews that go on with that, we were able to kind of coax them and make them feel better about giving that power to the business analysts or the product owners or someone else on the team who didn't write code. And so now that person on the team has the ability to sort of push the big red button to put it into production. And that's one of the ways that we kind of satisfied their needs and we're still compliant. The other big thing we learned is that burden of compliance and approval, like no one knows that better than the team themselves who's building it. When you have 100 different app teams and you have small groups of silos of engineers or networking folks or architects, it's really hard for them to have an intimate knowledge of everything that's going on. And so we have a lot of process and noise about keeping them informed. And really at the end of the day, they just ended up doing what the app teams wanted to do anyway, right? It's like this approval process became, how can I say no instead of like, how can I say yes? So what we started doing was uncrippling a lot of our apps, right? We started giving the teams themselves org manager rights, right? We started giving them, space developer and letting them manage those things organically themselves instead of us feeling like we had to control that for them. So that was a big, big win for us. Another thing that was really beneficial, so we got these security folks and these compliance folks to kind of change their way of thinking. And we're like, great, you guys are on board, so you're okay with these 3 teams in production. What if we applied that same principle to our other platform that we're transitioning off of, like the 1,500 apps that are there? And that's when like the explosion happens, and we're like, no, we're not ready for that. We're not ready for that. But I think the benefit here is I think it's really easy to say you're okay with something when the risk is low. But by doing this, we're also helping a lot of the teams that are currently building software and not yet made the transition to Cloud Foundry. So we're using this, it's kind of like a new legal precedence, and we're trying to go in and question some of our old processes as well. Obviously, you want to not spend too much money on that. Like we don't add a lot of features to our old platform, by the way. We try to do some low-hanging fruit stuff. So the next challenge came up. It's so the teams can push quickly now. So why aren't the teams pushing more often? So let's say we did figure out that issue with the CF push. We got the compliance, security, ops folks, they're all on board. What we found is that the teams still weren't going to production as frequently as we would like. So what do we think are some of the reasons for that? What would stop a team from going into production more often? What's that? New? Yeah, the unknown? Testing, that's a big one. Yep. Dependencies, that's a really good one. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Yep. What else? I heard someone say fear.
Fear.
Yeah, fear of what? What do we think we're scared of?
Change, vulnerability from, every time you push there's a risk.
Change, vulnerability, right? So it seems like we're lacking some confidence, right? It's like we put a change out there, how are the house of cards going to fall down? Yep. So for us, we had a lot of those things. We're going to talk about that in a moment. We also had some weird stuff. It costs teams money to go into production. So for us, we have this review board process, right? We have this performance testing. We have ServiceNow and Opsware, and there's actual line items when you go to production, a team gets charged money. We can't figure out what account it goes to or why it's there. Yeah, it's really frustrating, right? So what we figured out is that by it costing money, whether it be labor, services, software, or whatever, when you ask a lot of questions, the teams don't go to production because it costs money. And so they're starting to batch this, right? Like, okay, let's save some money by just doing, let's build a bunch of stuff and then wait until we push out production and save some cost. So one of the things that we've learned is that we have to get the cost of deployment free. And by doing that, we're going to encourage the teams to push more frequently. We want this to economically make sense for them. And so there's some changes there. Another reason I touched upon it was this whole review board process, right? So every single change that went in had to be approved by someone. So that whether that was like an architectural review board, a compliance check, you're making table changes to shared databases. So this process was pretty lengthy. And so for us, what we came up with is sort of this terms of service for going fast. And a lot of this is modeled after the great work that the teams in New York did with the Pivotal Labs. So really the goal here was to say, look, if you follow these guidelines and you build software this way and you are doing TDD and pair programming and code reviews and you're agile and you're pushing out your stuff frequently, we will pre-approve you to put stuff into production. And what we cared about is when you kind of deviated from those guardrails, then let's have a conversation. So that's kind of what we landed on. The interesting thing, though, in order to do that, we didn't know enough about the applications themselves. So one of the other lessons that we learned was to kind of personify our software. And so we're in the early stages. This is one of the things I'm pushing, is coming up with sort of like Facebook for our apps. So in this model, the analogies are like, what does it mean to interact with an app's wall? So if you thought of your application as a Facebook person, right? What do you think some of the benefits would be of being able to post something on their wall or read it? Like, what are some of the benefits of that you guys can think of?
Internal marketing.
Yeah, you can ask some questions, see how you're doing, right? See what other people are saying. The ability to like an app, right? So for us, this was saying, hey, there's these 3 other apps, and this gets kind of into the dependencies a bit, but our app is closely related to these other apps, right? We're all friends, right? And so that comes up, right? You can use this concept of like friends as sort of this linkage, like, right, what are these apps that are kind of related to each other? And we found this kind of useful in some prototyping and stuff. And then this is where it really comes useful, right? So if you could see an app's friend list, so you think about impacts, right? So when you're making a change, it's like, hey, who are all the people that somehow, somewhere, someday cared about what was going on with this application? If we make a change on that, maybe these are the people that we need to talk to and talk about. And this leads to this other lesson, which is storing metadata about your software. And you have to be able to query and filter this data. So we're going to ask another question here. So what are some of the interesting data points that you think we need to capture for apps if you want to maybe deploy or support that app? What do you think are some of the crucial data points? Dependencies, yep.
Tech stack.
Tech stack. Why is tech stack important?
The reason I guess you plays into the dependencies as well as just kind of like who can work on them depending on if people have that skill set or not maybe.
Yeah, so we're talking about skill sets, and if you had to make some changes to it, yep, yeah, I agree. And then who owns the app? That is the number one question that comes up all the time. Another idea that I just had a conversation about it today, and this is happening in our messaging system, right? So we have all these consumers and publishers in messaging, and a consumer goes down and support gets called, and we're like, okay, the queue's filling up. Like, what's the business impact? And it's like, all right, well, what business or what app is using that, right? So that comes up a lot. I agree, the owners, right? So we're coming up with this concept of assigning owners to everything, and then if that person leaves the company, like it automatically gets assigned to whoever they report to. And the idea is that whoever that person is, if they're getting alerts and pages and all this stuff, sooner or later they're going to make that owner someone else. So that's the idea. We'll test that out. Any other data points? What else do we think?
So compliance and security.
Yeah.
Sensitive, right?
Yeah, sensitivity. So data sensitivity is a big one. What do you think? So if you're trying to, you have a team that has an app and they have some, PCI data or PII, right? Like you would want to know that. What's the highest level of sensitivity of data that the application works with? And that's important because when you're trying to pre-approve people to make changes into production, you want to know that. If you're going up a level of classification, like the conversation changes, right? You want to go back and look at that architecture in more detail, look at your security, look at the protections and so forth. That's a really good one. Anything else?
User exposure.
What's that?
Who the audience is for the app.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something you're exposed to the external world, or is it something you're using internally?
Yep.
That kind of stuff.
Users, yeah. Who's using it? Is it internal, external? What is this useful for? If you know who the users are. What does that help you do?
Notifications.
Notifications, right. The app's going to be down. There's a maintenance window. We're going to talk about how you can do that without any downtime in a minute. But yeah, anything else? Can you guys think of anything? Okay. Yep, good ones. So we're in the midst of thinking of what we're going to use to store this. We're still wrapping our head around it. So another challenge. So let's say we've solved the issue of being able to push quickly, right? We've reduced that from 4.5 hours to just a few minutes. We're tearing down these barriers and the costs. Hopefully we're empowering the teams and are able to push more frequently, but some of the teams are still scared to do that. And so what do you guys think are some of the reasons, and we've talked a little bit about testing, but what are some of the things that make teams scared to push code to production? And how do we build confidence on that? So think about your own organizations, right? Yep.
They don't have a good test coverage for their software.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
They don't have a good test coverage for their software. So
Good test harness? Okay.
Yeah, good even test coverage.
Right, okay, so testing, that's really important. Yep, maybe they don't have enough testing. Yep.
They're probably just gunshot. They've had bad experiences in the past.
Yep, that's definitely a legitimate one. Gun shy, new stuff. You had your hand up.
Ability to roll back changes.
What's that?
The ability to roll back changes if something fails in production.
Okay, rollback changes. So they probably didn't think of a backup plan or something like that? Or,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so at Home Depot, we actually make people do backup plans. And they have to document them. And they hardly ever get used. And then when they do have to get used, it never goes, it doesn't work, right? It never works, right? It's like, the backup plan is install the old version, right? It's like, okay, that's great until you're making table changes and you're seeding data and a bunch of other things. No, that's a good point. You had your hand up for a moment, or?
Maybe getting measured on outages versus time to recovery.
Okay, yep.
Incentivizing.
Yeah, that's a good one. Cheater. What else?
You build confidence by doing something more regularly, and they've been like organizationally bullied into not doing something regularly.
Yeah, okay, so doing it more frequently. So the fact that we don't do it frequently, we don't have the confidence, and maybe we're getting bullied and so forth. No, I agree. Think about a time where deployment didn't go well. What happens typically? Yep. Yeah, it's a long weekend, right? What about leadership? What happens?
Pressure.
Pressure.
You're on conference call 24/7.
Conference call, the war room,
SWOT until it's fixed.
SWOT, the root cause analysis, the RCA, the business impacts, right? All that stuff, right? No one wants to do that. So if we deploy twice a year, we're like, at worst, we're running 2 weekends a year out of my life, right? So, so we kind of nailed it, I think. So, so the idea here is we want to make small changes and push more frequently, right? Huge fan of that. But again, until we kind of knock down some of those other barriers, the teams weren't able to do that. I think another one is a shift in mindset. So at Home Depot, we're very risk averse. When we do make mistakes, like we're gonna chain you down, we're gonna ask you a million questions. It's an interrogation, and what went wrong, and we're gonna get a get well plan, and we're gonna do all this stuff, right? Someone's on the hot seat, and it's very uncomfortable. So I think we need to shift from a culture of like, hey, you can't make a mistake, to not a problem. We can recover very quickly from that. And luckily, Cloud Foundry has really helped us with this due to blue-green deployments. Does anybody know what blue-green is? I hope everyone's raising. If you don't raise your hand, okay. Go read about this. It might be, in my opinion, one of the best reasons to jump on the platform. Essentially, in a nutshell, your production environment is living out there, and you're making a change in a completely other environment. And the idea is like you just kind of shift the pointer. Like, hey, people coming in, you're going to use this other one. You're quickly going to know if something blew up, and then there's really nothing to back out. You just shift the needle back, and then you can go and fix that problem. And it seems so simple. It's like when I read about this for the first time, I was like, I can't believe like I have never tried this before. Like it's nuts. It just makes so much sense. When you do have some databases, especially shared databases, there are some, some other things you need to think about there, and those are that's like a whole other classification of difficult, and we're still sorting through those. But at least for us, we know that if we're not making a lot of big data changes, or until we start replicating our data environments as well, if it's just a compute issue or something like that, like it's very quick, very easy for us to kind of just roll back. And then we talked about this earlier also. You don't want to put like your HomeDepot.com and Cloud Foundry on day one, right? Like you don't want to do that. You really want to pick some low-risk items, right? You want to work through all of these hiccups that we're working through. And there are a lot of little things, right? But it's not the platform that causes those hiccups. It's really us. It's our process and our people. It's our code repos. It's like our firewall. Like there's a whole bunch of issues that go into this. So start low risk. That way when something does go wrong, like the fire is not burning and people aren't clamoring for someone's job. And then after you get some success stories, you'll build up some confidence, to try some, higher risk items. This is really, really, really important. I can't stress this enough. Have good leaders, and you have to get them on board. And the reason for this is like stuff isn't going to always work correctly. And when that happens, you need to have someone that has your back, right? Like you have to have someone that buys into the philosophy, right, of recover quickly versus making a mistake. Also, with our new leadership in the space for the last couple of years, they've been a huge fan of this feedback loops and iterative development and getting things out there quickly. We're starting to view things as like when we find out a customer doesn't like something 2 months into it, we just saved 6 months of development time and money, right? I mean, we're used to putting apps out every 6 to 8 months to find out like, developers aren't adopting it, users didn't really care for it, and we just spent a ton of money. And for us to find that out 6 months or 4 months earlier, like we're saving tons of money doing that. And then there's also the whole don't overact to the first production issue, right? Someone from Pivotal, we had a round table. They came and visited the company, and we were talking about, this is when we were trying to get some momentum for our operational change. And someone coined this term, I don't know who it was, they call it operational scarring. And this is really what's built up all of this process at Home Depot for so long, is that somewhere, someday, someone made a mistake, and we went in and we came up with a really complicated plan, and we came up with all these steps that have to be followed, and it's a huge broad stroke, and we applied it to everyone equally. And so we had all these teams that were doing low risk work and just trying to innovate, being kind of handcuffed and bogged down by this process that we were applying to these high risk applications. So when something does go wrong, right, we want to be pragmatic about it, right? We don't want to apply some solution to this that's going to make every team thereafter suffer because, one team, forgot a semicolon somewhere or something like that, right? So any questions on this or any? How many people have, yeah, go ahead.
How do you retrain your existing leaders to be good leaders?
So I wasn't paid to say this. Pivotal will help you with that. And I'm being honest, I was a skeptic, right? There's some really bright people that are working closely with our business partners. It's like a two-pronged approach. So we definitely have the technical folks that are helping us kind of on the development side and the engineering side. But this business acumen side of it and like the product piece and the benefits and so forth, I think Pivotal does an amazing job of that. And the labs projects are one good way of doing that if you can do it. So, taking a business person, getting them out of their environment, embedding them with the team, in another environment, and just showing them what's possible, it helps because they come back and the mindset's completely different. They're like, I'm telling you this works. Like, we're not paying double for pair programming. Like, that's the number one thing I hear is like, when we tried this in the past, the business folks are like, no, we're not doing pair programming. Like, what is it going to cost? I'm going to get half the features or I'm going to pay double. And it doesn't work that way. So I think having them involved and embedded and seeing that themselves is one good way. But again, having good leaders, that's another way. So at Home Depot, at the top, we have the visions there. We're driving that down. We have a lot of new hires like myself. I've only been there for 2 years. We have a lot of interns and kids out of college, and they're used to these tools and this culture and this methodology. So we have the groundswell from the bottom. Where we're having a challenge is our middle management. And it's all those people on that other slide, right? It's like, it's the managers, it's the senior managers, some of our directors. We're kind of hitting them from both sides. And so that's where our challenge is right now, but we're getting better at it.
So could you talk a little bit about kind of even the higher level? What are some of these apps being used for, and how did these new methodologies make those managers that you had to change their mindset for see we're getting more revenue, we're getting more customers, there's some other, the business type of benefit that they saw as a result of it?
Yeah, so I wish that's a great question. I wish I had brought some stats, and maybe I can send out like an update to that. But I think, again, for us having come from the very top, the directive was very simple. It's like, hey, we're going to do labs, and I need 3 volunteers. And so it was one of those things where people, we had some people that were willing to kind of step out on a ledge and try something different. And the development teams were really excited about it. They all knew about Cloud Foundry, right? They had heard of Pivotal and so forth, so they were excited. But yeah, so I think it was just, getting a couple volunteers and getting them on board. I've been in other companies where it's been completely bottom up, and it takes a lot longer. And I think you need more of what you're talking about. But when you have the leadership that we've had, and we've been lucky for that, and that message is driving down, that helps a lot. So, yeah. I think for us, we weren't focusing so much on those metrics as well. Like, we were just trying to get better at just building software quickly. Getting really good about turning around a request into something in production in a week. And you'd be amazed at just writing stories at that level and thinking of things at that level. Like, that alone is such a huge shift in what we were doing. I mean, that has value in itself. So just getting to that point, I think, would be beneficial. Any other questions? Yep. And we're going to get through this very quickly then. Okay. Yep.
It goes back to the Facebook analogy.
Okay.
So I assume you didn't put apps on Facebook.
No, absolutely. No, we're not in that business. No.
How did you present that to the business?
Yeah, so actually the business, so for us, this was all internal. So this was just for a support perspective. So for us, the big thing was the support group. So once Cloud Foundry enables teams to own more of the full stack. So they're doing the configuration, they're spinning up the data services. In a lot of instances, they're doing their own data modeling. They're standing up their services, they're writing the UI. And what's interesting about that is when something goes wrong, like for us, a big company, when at a big company, we have a huge support industry and support group, right? So when something comes in, there's one place to call, and that team handles it, right? And it's interesting because now with Cloud Foundry, that changes a little bit, right? There's not this one team that supports everything. I mean, we're struggling with the concept of like, what does it look like when the team supports their own app? Like, I mean, how do you even manage that? Like, what's the pager list for that look like, right? So we're still in our infancy there. But the Facebook app concept, or the baseball card app, or whatever you want to call it, is by giving apps an identity, right? You start to wrap data and interactions around those. And it helps with dependencies and who the owner is and who the decision maker is and what's the billing code. There's all this really cool information about the app. And I think that helps kind of scramble the troops and figure out who to call and what's the business impact. You can glean all of that information a lot faster.
Can that been like a remedy
Yeah, so we're still, so for that piece, like we just started talking about that, and there are some things on the shelf that you can do to help with that. We haven't landed on one yet, but that's as a result of a recent RCA war room thing. This kind of came up like, hey, why don't we try this? We're running into this issue, and it's not just for this. We're looking to apply that across the board. So, good question. Anything else? Okay. So another thing that my group's done. So I work a lot with our dev tools. So that's Jira and GitHub and Eclipse plugins and command line interface stuff. And we brought Pivotal Tracker in as an option as well for some of our teams to work with and to get them set up. So what we like to do every time we get some new cool shiny toy is we create an Active Directory group. And we say you have to request access to gain access to this tool. So someone has to go into some safe application or something else. They have to request access. We have to grant it. There's some data approver. There's all this stuff, right? So really what happens is you have this really cool toy or tool and everyone wants to use it. And instead of taking minutes like it does in the cloud, it takes several days. Depends on the backlog, who gets the email, did it fall through the cracks, I thought you handled it, no, I thought you handled it, right? So what do you think, so why does it take days? So what do you guys think? So this comes up also with our foundations. So we have a lot of teams that are asking requests for orgs. How many people are familiar with orgs in Cloud Foundry? Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of teams that are very interested. We're running out of capacity already just after a few months, but they want to get on board. And right now, it's a very manual process to get them on board. What do you guys think are some of the other things that could cause this to take a long time? What about your own? Anyone have experience with this at your own companies? Yeah.
Crossing organizational boundaries for us is a big one like this.
Yeah. What's crossing organizational boundaries? What are some examples?
Well, I work for Verizon. Wireline versus wireless versus consumer versus enterprise, all run by different teams, different VPs, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Even though they may be working on almost identical projects.
Okay.
And we use Jira internally.
Okay.
But seeing other people's work is really hard for us.
Okay. Do you guys set up a separate Jira for each of those kind of organizations, or are you sharing one?
No, we have separate ones right now.
Yeah. We're really big in centralizing everything. So we were like, yeah, we're going to put out the enterprise Jira, and we're going to do all this stuff, and of course, no one used it. We put out an enterprise Jenkins, right? And it just, teams didn't have enough control over their build process and the testing. Artifactory. There's a bunch of things that we're putting out as an enterprise, and it's not quite meeting the needs of the teams. And so, and they all have to end up kind of going out. And if you want to innovate, right, you can't be locked down to this kind of centralized enterprise approach.
And usually there's budgets underlying those board choices.
Yeah, that's a budget. That's a really good one. How many people have been told no because of the whole cap versus expense thing, right? Doesn't that come up all the time? Like, how many people have an organization where you're good at paying for things monthly? Anyone? Yeah? Wait, you guys are laughing. You do. So what's the secret?
We work for Pivotal.
Oh, okay. Damn. Not fair. Yeah, so we have this now. So right now at Home Depot, a new team wants an org. We have this. We're on the fence. Right now, we're this one-time cost. We'll keep going. There's like a one-time cost, and you get on, you never pay anything again. So what do you think are some of the downsides to that, right? How many people have like orphaned apps on their platform somewhere? Like you don't know who it is that's doing it or who owns it or, okay. And how many people, we have some architects that know we call them like all the dead bodies. Like there's 3 people that know where all the dead bodies are buried. Yeah, that happens a lot. Like you haven't cracked that code open in a long time. You almost don't want to make any changes because you're scared, right? So, yeah, I agree. So what our thinking was, if we could get to a model where we could charge teams monthly, right? That's like a reminder every month that, hey, you're using this thing. You're paying for this thing, right? I mean, if you were using it in the cloud, like this is what you'd be doing, right? You would get some monthly usage report. You'd be reminded that you're paying for something. So we're struggling with that, and we haven't found a good solution for it yet. But I agree.
Doesn't that kind of pose your earlier, how do I get
Yeah, but I think this is a little bit different because it's not going into production. This is more of like an infrastructure and an overhead. Really being an on-prem shop, really what we're striving for is to take this kind of public domain, right? Like and just kind of bring it over and have it the same way that you're used to. So, but instead of having a credit card, you would just, put in your billing code or your project code, right? And we would bill to that. And when that project is up or the funding is gone, right? Like we can, you can get a late notice or something like, hey, who's paying for this now? And then, because what we're hoping is the answer to that is like, oh, we don't need that anymore. And then we can decommission and then kind of reuse our infrastructure again. In its current model, that doesn't happen. Like for us to look at things that we don't need anymore and we don't know who the friends list or the dependencies are, it's a huge corporate initiative to say, hey, we want to take these things and upgrade it or decommission them. And then you basically have to do like a SWAT team and kind of go out and do all these interviews and look at source code and scan stuff and look at logs, and it's a mess. And then even then you don't feel good about it, right? So, yeah. Yeah, so what we learned is remove all barriers of entry, right? I got slapped on the wrist really hard by that same senior VP. He sent a message and he's like, I just used Pivotal Tracker last week and I got signed up and I was in there in like 2 minutes. And for you, I had to email 3 people, it took me 2 days, and it's kind of still not working. Like, what's up? And it really hit home for me. And I was like, that's a great question. Like, what the hell is up, right? So I went to the team and I kind of started digging into some things, and we're really big about Active Directory and LDAP integration and all this stuff. I'm like, it's on our network, right? Everyone has a login. Isn't that good enough, right? What if the default was everyone has access, right? Like, why do you have to request access? So that also came up to this, self-provisioning. So if I go online and I want to create new orgs in Cloud Foundry, I don't need to email anyone, right? Like you just go in, you sign up, you enter your information, and you're good. We're in the process of standing this up now. We're delivering it this month. It's kind of this self-service portal to Cloud Foundry. You can pick your quota plans, and there's different chargeback models and stuff like that. So we're really excited for this. And the early buzz is the teams are super excited as well. So real quick, why do you think teams require people to access requests for things? What's the #1 reason? Is it security? It's a collaborative tool, right? Probably not security. So why do we always ask people to ask permission first?
Visibility.
What's that?
Visibility.
Visibility?
They know what's going on.
Okay, could be visibility. Cost control, that's a big one. So when you go and get an enterprise license, it's not really all you can eat, right? It's like some big number that we hope we don't hit anytime soon, right? Like that's really what it turns out to be. And for us, we're shooting at like the 66% thing. Like, yeah, once we kind of start getting to half the people, maybe we'll revisit this, right? But it's a collaborative tool, right? Like the best use case would be you run out of licenses in day 1, right? I mean, it's a tool that's helping people talk and code review and work together. Like this is the best case scenario, right? If you just open it up and everyone's using it, right? And you come back day 2 and you're like, hey boss man with the bucket of money, 100% of our developers are using this. Can I get more money? If the answer is no, you need a new leader, I think, right? So this should be an easy sell. Of course, availability, assuming they have the money. So our new philosophy is that, look, we want to run out of licenses, right? If we're doing that, we're doing something that's valuable. And what we've learned is there's lots of options here too. So if you start getting towards that breaking point, it's really easy to look at the logs for a lot of these things like, hey, who hasn't used this in 6 months or 8 months or a year? And you can prune those people, revoke access, right? And you can kind of open it up until you get the approval. So yeah, so this was a really, really good turning point for us. Yeah, question?
So which team owns those collaboration tools, whereas the self-provisioning portal you mentioned?
Yeah, so my team's writing that. So
is your team in development or operations, or you change your work? And
yeah, so my team officially is called the platform team. We work very closely with the DevTools team. And when I took the position, it was a lot of kind of configuration or building custom software for like PMO stuff. They have this analogy. This is like we're like the island of misfit apps, right? This is like, hey, our company needs this thing and no one wants to own it or build it. Like, can you guys do that? So they are developers, and they have a really good mix of everything that's going on across the entire company. So what I'm trying to move us towards is instead of us building these things in an island, right, and then saying, hey, I hope this works, we're actually trying to pair up with business teams and application teams and do kind of the pair programming and TDD approach. And it's like, hey, who needs something, anything? Great, we'll work with you because we're really familiar with the platform, we're really familiar with the data sources and the databases and all the politics and the networking and firewall. And once we stand that up, we're gonna help get that out there for other teams, right? So it's almost like this inner-sourced approach where we're saying, we'll help you build something really cool, and then we're gonna help communicate that to the rest of the company. And then hopefully, it gets forked and added onto, and we get more of this crowdsourced approach to it. But it's a good question.
So what about portfolio management?
Yep.
I mean, one concern about open access would be different BUs would essentially try and do the same thing, and they wouldn't be aware that they're creating the same solution.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I'm a huge fan that I think when you build something cool and useful and your API is really clean, like it's gonna bubble up to the top. I think we spend a lot of time analyzing and trying to reduce duplication, that those are resources and money that are better spent elsewhere. I actually think a little overlap's okay. A little competition's good, right? One team will do it better. And when some other team figures out that they've done something cool, or, they'll fork it, they'll add on to it, they're gonna extend it, they're gonna, merge it back in. So I think we're trying to not spend as much time trying to analyze duplication and try to stop there, but just let teams do whatever they want, right? And we think organically the best ideas will start bubbling up to the top. And a lot of that's due to kind of this shift in mindset that we're learning from like doing the Pivotal Labs work.
If I could follow up on that, would you say that the relatively normal management governance of keeping track of how developers are deployed on different projects and the chargebacks that are coming from the development platform and such, would help root those things out too?
Yes.
Gee, we're working on this project, but it's not really producing much. Does this make sense to keep it going?
Yeah. So there's another big, so this was around portfolios and products and how teams are built around projects and how that funding works, right? And no, we agree. So if you looked at a lot of our project codes, I mean, there's hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know the numbers. There's a lot of different little buckets of money. And so there's actually an initiative here to kind of reduce those and consolidate them. And so what we want is, fewer but larger buckets of money, and then let the teams themselves have more direction and control over those things rather than managing it kind of at an enterprise level. So what we're trying to do is not get so granular in how the money is split up, and have each portfolio say, look, these are my resources, and it could be spread across multiple teams. Here's my money. Here's what my business folks are pitching. I'm going to vet those ideas, and we're going to kind of dole this out the way that we think is best. So that's a great question. And what we're hoping is when you have fewer codes that change less often, you kind of get this development as a service, right? It's like I have a finite number of resources, a finite budget. It's almost like the burn rate, startup type mentality is like I know that I can work on this initiative for this long before I either run out of money or I have to change and pivot and change directions. So, good question. Anything else? Yep.
One other question related to self-provisioning. Do you allow dev teams to provision non-dev environment like test and even staging production?
So do we allow them to self-provision in production? Is that what the question is? Not yet, but that's the next phase. So right now, we've enabled teams to have an org manager in the lower life cycles. So my team is completely out of the way with promoting people to space developer or auditor. We get completely out of the way. So the idea is that you would go online, sign up for an org, pick your quota, put in your charge code, and then that's it, you own it. And if you want to invite someone, promote someone, that's up to you, and that's up to each team. We're actually suggesting we do the same thing in production. And that's a little bit tougher of a battle, but we're working through it. We're starting to get some traction. And it goes back to the same thing, right? Like if you're following a certain process and you're doing certain things and we're collecting data and metrics about successful deployments, like why can't we, hand over that control to the teams themselves? So not yet. So it's not working in production yet. That's the next step.
One of our major challenges of Dish Network, a lot of our big deployments, we change our middle tier or service tier, impacting, minimum dozens of other applications or service or even downstream third-party system. One app my team partnered with Pivotal Labs and in the past is we built a close to 12-factor app. We're able to move faster, but just a lot of times I call it, agile hit the stone wall. It's like, hey, I can go by myself.
Right.
I cannot push the button even, I have the ability to do it. So how do you guys run into any challenges? Because there's a lot of downstream, upstream, stuff related to my change. I can't just push stuff, into
Right.
production as well.
Well, this is getting into a lot of the nuances about microservices and domain services. I mean, it's what it seems like. Did everyone hear the question, by the way? Or so you're working with labs, you're building some stuff, you're doing the whole 12-factor, and you get to a certain point and you kind of hit a wall, and is that pushback coming from upstream or downstream? Is this like consumers of the application?
Yeah, we have, for my application, one of my applications I own, I have upstream applications consume my stuff, right? So I have downstream, depending on the output from my team. And a lot of times,
Right.
if I make an interface change on my on my service, one of my services in my app is like, hey, it's going to impact quite a lot of other areas, which is those teams are not there yet. Right, so they're still going through we have a conventional our change control centralized enterprise software change management team, and they do everything manually there.
Okay.
Okay, so you probably experienced that war room looks very familiar to me.
Yeah.
At
So
night,
this is more the release train, right? So when you have a bunch of different teams working on something and it kind of all has to kind of go out together and the release cycles aren't lining up. It seems like your team's going really, really fast, but then you have some other teams that aren't going as fast and they have some other, I wish I could help you there. That's a tough nut to crack. So I think for us, right, if you dig into the principles of microservices, right, and you're thinking about backwards compatibility and versioning, I think those things help. Where we have run into some of those issues is because we think we're doing something that is like a really kind of isolated purpose, and it's not. It's doing like 2 or 3 other things, and so we've had to take a step back and really break those out. And there's this kind of concept of a domain service versus like an actual little microservice. That's a tough nut to crack. So being an agile guy, what I tell myself is that if you have to rely on other teams, treat them the same way that you would any other external dependency or a third party or a contractor, right? Just tell them what you want, give them a date, and then you have to kind of rely on them to hit the date. But you should be able to put your stuff out without them, right? Hopefully. You want to architect it in such a way that you can. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got that pretty much. We've got
Okay.
all stuff out.
Cool.
Let's give it a shot and try to,
Yeah, we can talk more after if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good topic. Well, that leads me to, looks like we already got into this. That's all we had. We're airing out a little bit of our dirty laundry. We're still in our infancy, so we've had Cloud Foundry for about a year. We have 3 teams in production. I would say we have about 20 in the lower life cycles, and some of those have some aspirations of going to production very soon. We're about to do our first few kind of major upgrades. We're about to do a big data store move and increase our capacity. We have lots of process and organizational change going about giving teams more control over our production foundation. So we're doing it. Everyone's excited. I definitely recommend the labs work. If you can't do everyone, do a few. Just real quick, so that 4.5-hour production or deployment, the team that came back from labs in New York, this was that team. And they had a whole bunch of people in the room, much higher level than them, telling them like, you can't do this, you can't do that, did you think about this? And we had like just plain developers, right, in the room saying, well, why can't we do that? And that, just that empowerment and that confidence and that, you know, like they've been through it and just their mindset and their shift, it was great. Like they were really resilient. They were very, you know, opinionated, and they were able to back up all their reasoning. And it was really good. I mean, it inspired me to kind of go back to my team and say, look, how can we help these guys out? Like they're saying all the right things. They're trying to do the right things. Like, why are we getting in their way? So I definitely recommend that experience if you can. So, any other questions? Yeah.
There's a lot of customization, particularly setting up service brokers, etc., to make Cloud Foundry effective.
Yeah.
Any lessons learned there?
Yeah, so we've learned a lot without even getting there yet. So we're barely scratching the surface. We have teams that are doing custom build packs, and we're having a lot of internal discussions about, you know, do you allow that or not allow that, and so forth. But for service brokers, we have a couple ideas, but we haven't even gotten to there yet. So everything we're doing now, we're literally, we're trying to just get it out there and let teams do what they want. We're looking to partner up with some teams and pair on maybe some service broker type stuff. That's what my team hopes to get into. It just hasn't come up yet, but we've seen a couple opportunities for that. Just trying to get the business folks on board to kind of buy in and pair up with our team. So yeah, we're just scratching the surface, and still we're learning a lot. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the first team, they are deploying, I think the most has been, they went to production 3 times in 1 week. That's the most, I think. They're kind of going on this cadence now where it's like about once a week, unless there's like a hot fix or something like that. The other teams are, depending, it's about every 2 to 3 weeks for some of the other teams. So.
Is it usually day-based, or is it based on like feature sets we complete, or how are you deciding?
Yeah, so this is typically feature sets, not a lot of data. So so we have another whole other issue I got to talk about with our data problem. You know, we're struggling with that a little bit. So actually some of our low risk items were due to a lack of dependency on some of our data stuff. So for us, it's a lot of compute scaling type things that we're looking at, but data is the next big thing that we're going to tackle. Maybe I'll come out in 6 months and talk about everything we've learned about doing that. So that's next on our radar for sure.
Was that multiple times a week more of a hot fix, or was it really feature set?
So yeah, so that particular case, it was like a release, and I think there were 2 hot fixes. Yep. For the release stuff, it's really, I mean, you can only get so granular, right? It's like, and they're kind of aligning on these 1 week kind of cadence and rhythm. So they're trying to push out new features about once a week. So that's where we're kind of landing. And we've also gone, that same team has gone 2 weeks before doing a deployment. So they don't feel the need to deploy every week, but that's what they're kind of shooting for. Yeah. Yes?
So how are you evaluating if Cloud Foundry has been, or the rollout of Cloud Foundry has been a success in the organization? Are there any ROI calculations you're doing, or are the metrics you're capturing to make sure that it's a success?
Yeah, so the metrics, I didn't bring those. Nick asked me for those too. It's a good question. Yeah, I think for us, what we're really looking at is the frequency of code changes and the deployments. So that's really been our goal, is to just really shorten the feedback loop. We're hoping that, that will, the money will come, right? I mean, if we're doing that and we're learning, we're pushing more frequently, that's why a lot of this is kind of focused on that. That was our big problem, is that we just weren't making changes frequently enough and getting them out there. So that's happening. I think the other thing is just the testimonials. Like, it's just the morale of the teams and the culture. So they're all blogging about their experiences. These get read at all hands meetings. We have a dev forum that we do once a month, and we have the teams come up and talk about some cool stuff they've done, and they're sharing that. So we've seen a huge shift in the teams that are on the platform, and just how empowered they feel and they can try things. So it's been really successful.